things my family did. I am not the voices in my head. I am not the pieces of the brokenness inside. I am light.
So, good afternoon and welcome to this week's The Double 15 Minutes, which, as we all know, is never just the double 15. We always do go on for an hour. But today I've got my guests on screen with me because today we're covering the topic of domestic abuse, but suicide. So domestic abuse related to suicide. And rather than sort of do my usual banter, I think it's such an important subject that we really do want to get into the discussion as soon as we can with this, because today I'm joined by Saurav Dutt, who is an author, a legal consultant, a human rights activist, as well as a journalist. Thank you, Saurav, for joining us today. And we've also got Nillo Morjaria, who is the aunt of Meera, who is the beautiful 25-year-old who took her life at the age of 25. I mean, if she was alive today, she would be 30. And this is something that we want to really focus on, is the fact that it's a life that has been taken that should never have been taken. And what can we learn from this? What can we do as humans, as a community, as friends and family, to ensure that actually no other mother or sister or father, or a friend goes through losing a loved one through domestic abuse related suicide? So before we go any further, Saurav, can I just invite you to talk a little bit about the book? What was the basis of it and how you got involved with writing the book?
Sure, thank you very much. About 5 or 6 years ago, working at a law firm.
Sorry, Saurav, your sound is it's going in and out. Sorry.
Sorry, can you hear me a bit better now?
Yes.
So about 5 or 6 years ago, I was involved in a law firm, and one of the partners held an event with a charity for those who had experienced domestic abuse. This was a person I'd worked with a number of years, and she revealed that she too had suffered from domestic abuse. And that was the catalyst to write my first book, The Butterfly Ring, which basically collated the experiences of well over 100 survivors of domestic abuse. And I wanted to focus on the South Asian community in particular, because it's an issue that isn't discussed enough and is often thrown under the carpet and is just considered too taboo. So I released that book, and it was in the form of a novel, and it kickstarted a lot of dialogue with charities and writing about the subject over a number of years. And then in my newsfeed one day, I saw about Meera's case and what happened. And like so many people, I was horrified by what happened, but particularly the age, how young she was. The fact that she could have been anyone who I would have met in my life. She could have been someone I could have gone to university with or met them socially. And I was really struck by this very sad case, and I read up everything I could about it, and I blogged about it as much as possible. And of course, I then joined a Facebook group dedicated to Meera, her life, and to spreading the word about domestic abuse in our communities and what we could do to curtail it. It was then that Daksha Dalal got in touch with me. Daksha, of course, is Meera's mother, who has experienced so much over the years, so much pain, so much grief. And she said, look, it's coming up to the 5-year anniversary. It's coming up to the 30th birthday. I really want to honor this by talking about what happened to her, to put together a book that details grief, a mother's grief, and what happened to Meera about domestic abuse, how to deal with it, about suicide awareness, mental health challenges, and depression. And so that's where we partnered up. And she said, look, you have written about the subject so eloquently, so in depth, and with such passion, that I would be honored if we could work together. And I thought, look, this is an ideal opportunity to empower this brave woman to talk about her experience. And that's how the book came together.
Yeah, no, because looking at your, the other books you've written, they are very much human interest books, aren't they? Where you're covering so many sort of like vast areas. So, for example, you said the Butterfly Room. You've got another one. There is a Light That Never Goes Out, Wild Horses, Garden of Bullets, Massacre at Jallianwala Bagh, Tiger. So you're doing the official movie novelization, which again, Tiger. Those of you who haven't seen it, it's on Netflix. It really does tackle. I suppose sort of like the class system and the different cultural attributes within sort of like, India, NRIs, etc. NRIs being non-residential Indians, and then Dear Mr. Bachchan and the Winter Song. Now, the thing that that struck me about sort of like all of your books, that you do tend to focus on human interest and actually like being a voice for those who may not necessarily be out there talking a lot. Now, what I actually want to say is, so shortly I'll go through, because we've had a few people joining us, so I'll say hello to those who have joined us. So if you are watching, because we're streaming live across Facebook, LinkedIn and YouTube, so please, if you've got any questions to ask Saurav or Nillo, who I'll come to now, about the book, about sort of their experience of writing the book, or the domestic abuse that they witnessed, or that they sort of like were told about, please, just put your comments in and we will do our best to answer them. And also just put your comments in and let us know where you're watching from, if you're watching from Facebook, LinkedIn or YouTube. So Nillo, here's coming to you, because I mean, obviously, you're Meera's aunt, and you're doing quite a few of these interviews alongside Saurav, because you were very, very close to Meera, and by all accounts, from having read the book, I mean, one thing that was apparent throughout the whole book was the fact that Meera was she had such an effervescent personality, and she literally, this just struck me right from the beginning, that literally she could only see the good in people. There was nothing in that book that actually showed that she saw the bad in anyone. Even when they showed her the bad in them, she chose to see the good. And that just tantamount to, the beautiful soul that she was. Nillo, can you explain why you're doing these interviews and not Meera's mum?
Okay. I think it's still very raw and quite painful for Daksha. It's a lot, and I think each time it kind of brings it flooding back each time, and I don't think I don't think she's ready yet to talk about it. Maybe in the future, but it's still very raw, and I think it brings back a lot of painful memories. So she asked if I would represent her.
And that's the thing, and Saurav, I'll bring you in on this, is that a lot of the times, when you are, talking to or working with domestic abuse victims or their families or friends, the domestic abuse victim has a lack of trust within themselves, but it's the friends and family that carry this guilt with them, don't they? Of what did I do wrong? What could I have done to prevent this? And actually, sometimes there is nothing that anybody could have done, because the perpetrators of domestic abuse are so clever in how they choose their victims and how they groom them. And the victim is always left with that, I'm the one at fault. I'm actually the perpetrator. The person that is abusing me isn't abusing me, I'm actually abusing them. And you do have this like complete mindset. So actually, friends and family aren't always able to do it. But sort of with going back to with you having written your first book on domestic abuse, did you find that the level of guilt amongst the families of the domestic abuse victims was excessively high?
Absolutely. I mean, that's particularly borne out by this book and our family too. But I've always found that the family and those left behind always asking.
Sorry, your sound is going in and out.
Can you hear me a bit better now?
Yeah, yeah.
So the question was always about what can these family members do to reconsider their options and their choices, and they always questioned themselves, even the Dalal family in the case of this book, and they always wondered, should I have spotted the signs earlier? Should I have been harder with this family member? Should I have been far more cruel if that's what was required? Should I have stepped in to try and deal with the perpetrator, for example? I mean, in the Dalal family's case, for example, there were cases where they thought maybe we should have confiscated her mobile phone at a certain point, because even after Meera had restricted seeing the perpetrator and visiting him and taking their calls, he knew that he still had one gateway to her, which was the phone. So to text her, to send her images, to call, and he was being very clever about this. And the fact that he had also installed tracker software, and yet, you know, as a family member, in hindsight, you're thinking, well, maybe I should have taken the phone from her, even if she screamed the house down or hated us for it. Maybe I should have taken that means away from her. And in the case of other survivors and families that I've spoken to in the past, they always thought, and one thing they often said to me is, if I was left with the option that my daughter hated me for the rest of her life, I could live with that, because at least I know I could have taken her away from the violence, from the danger zone, from all of that risk of physical harm. But that's something they only think about after the fact, when the worst has happened.
And the thing is, though, you see, because we all, as humans, it's just human nature to do the whole, you know, should have, would have, could have. But at the end of the day, we know, and, you know, and I'll talk about sort of like people I know that have gone through, you know, a similar abusive pattern, where actually the perpetrator, fine, they may have taken the phone, but that perpetrator would still have found a way to access. I mean, I know domestic abuse victims who did try to get away from the perpetrator, and the perpetrator would stand outside their door, would turn up at their workplace, would turn up at the tube station, like in London, they'd turn up at the tube station where they knew that, you know, their victim was going to be coming out from. They, you know, turn up at whichever cafe that the victim was going to have. So even taking that phone away is not necessarily, but we are left with that level of guilt. Now, Nillo, you know, going from sort of like a family point of view, because you were very, very close to Meera, and, you know, I mean, obviously yes, it's been 5 years, but it's still no less devastating now than it was 5 years ago. You know, and I know Lakshya has, you know, it's taken a lot of courage to come and write this book. Yeah. But she's also, she's faced a lot of backlash from the community, which is something you were saying, Saurav, in terms of the South Asian community and trying to get that level of education there. But she's faced quite a bit of backlash and quite a lot of negativity and negative comments. You know, what message have you got for those people who are making comments about, you know, saying things like, well, you're only doing this for the money, you're monetizing the death of your daughter, you're doing this, you know, because for, I don't know, for fame or whatever, I'm paraphrasing here. What have you got to say to them, Nillo?
I think some people have said some horrendous things, but I think they're in the minority. You know, people say things like, oh, it's been 5 years, surely, you know, by now you should be getting over it, as if, you know, nothing major has happened. And, you know, she has had some cruel comments, but thankfully it's in the minority. And I would say to those small-minded people, you know, we all go through hard times, tough times in our life. Very few of us will escape a tough time. And I hope that, you know, when your tough time comes, that people will reach out, you know, be kind, you know, help rather than gossip, rather than say cruel things, because cruel comments help no one. You know, I think as a community, we need to reach out and help as much as we can. You know, we need to help someone who's down, who's feeling, you know, who's going through a really tough period in their lives, not criticize, because criticism doesn't help anyone.
No, and it's, you know, I mean, and this is a mother who is grieving her child. It doesn't matter how old a child is. You know, it's like, it doesn't matter. I mean, you know, it's like my parents still treat me like a baby, and I'm you know, I mean, I, you know, sort of like, yeah, you know, I'm old enough, you know, to be, you know, to have a child that would be Meera's age now. So, I think it's that level of sort of like judgment and cruelty, and also for those, like you said, it's, you know, just let's open our minds a bit. Now, going back to the book, you know, sorry, I'll say, I mean, obviously it's, you know, reading, I think the first chapter, A Night of Violence, was probably, I mean, the whole book is, there's an element of, I'm not going to sugarcoat this, it's horrific. You know, it's the first chapter, A Night of Violence, was absolutely horrific to read. As an author, and you know, with Daksha actually narrating this and telling you the story, I mean, how difficult as an author was it for you to actually capture? Because literally, I had to read that first chapter in short sections because it was hard. I mean, you know, so what was the sort of like the process around it, and you know, and also then another question for Nillo to that is, when did you guys, the extended family, become aware of the plight that Meera was actually going through? So let's do Saurav first. Let's start with a question in terms of that first chapter and, you know, basically the whole book. Just getting yourself into that mindset.
Sure. I mean, the process of putting together the book was through interviews with all of the key family members and extended family as well. So Sonia, for example, Meera's sister, was a key element, as well as her husband, so Meera's brother-in-law, and of course Daksha and Daksha's husband, Meera's wife. So it was really difficult because you're trying to draw out information which is awful and horrible in its essence, but what underlies everything is a sense of justice and anger. So Daksha was very brave and she was very angry about the situation, and that drove her on. So it made interviewing her and writing about it easier, because I also, as a human being and someone who writes about the subject so much, even I became angry, because when you do read that first chapter and you understand what happened to Meera, you can't help but becoming emotionally involved and angry and wishing you could have stepped in and done something. And the fact that in this case there was actually someone sitting and watching everything unfold in the comfort of his seat and did nothing, it makes you even more angry. So that anger drives you on, and you turn that anger into something righteous, that you understand, look, what happened to Meera on that night would have happened to many, many girlfriends, wives, mothers all around the world, and they will be happening even now. Certainly once lockdown lifts and we have more social events, there will be boyfriends and husbands and lovers who get jealous and decide in the middle of the night that, look, I'm going to go out and teach a lesson to this person. And unfortunately, what happened in that chapter unfolds. So yes, to answer your question, it was really difficult and challenging, but it helps that the family members were so, you know, so emotional and righteous about what they had to say, and they couldn't sugarcoat the violence. They had to describe it in all of its horrible glory, because that's what other survivors and family members can relate to, because unfortunately what happened to Meera has happened to many other women too.
And that, I mean, if you don't mind me sort of like talking a little bit more about that and actually letting the audience know, because I would actually encourage, you know, anybody that's watching this show, you know, please do buy the book and read it, because not for anything other than, do you know what, it's about educating ourselves and actually helping ourselves become more aware of, you know, things around us that we may not be aware of, you know, the gaslighting. But I think the thing that really sickened me to my stomach was the perpetrator. He sickens me anyway, because I think he's just, you know, but we'll park my opinions on that. His friend sickened me, because to actually call the perpetrator and tell him that his girlfriend is doing things, basically stir up, and then take pleasure in watching a man, in essence, sort of like literally nearly kill a young lady, you know, it was just, that's what made me sort of like the angriest, was the friend. The perpetrator, I think he's a scumbag, but the friend is like probably the most disgusting person in the world. It's like, I'm sorry, but if you are happy to watch, then you are complicit in, you know, the death of, you know, a bright, vivacious young woman that should never have been in that position. But yeah, that first chapter, and then sort of going into, you know, what I was asking you, Nillo, is like, when did the extended family become aware of the plight of all this, and yourself personally?
Okay. I think very slowly. I think the first thing that struck me, we'd all been on a family holiday to Botswana, about 20 of us, and she had some lovely pictures of us all, and she tagged me into some of the pictures. And then suddenly one time I looked on my Facebook and I thought, oh, it's been deleted. You know, what? It's such an innocent picture, you know, a group of us on safari in Botswana, you know. Why would you delete it, you know? And then a couple of other pictures that you know, I looked on that had been deleted on her Facebook page, had been deleted, and it just made me question, you know, why, kind of thing. And then you know, I speak to Daksha, and Daksha would say some of her friends have said, you know, told me that Meera said, please don't message me, you know, please don't phone me, please don't message me. And that, you know, and then she was losing a lot of weight, and there were subtle signs. You know, it wasn't altogether obvious straight away, but there were subtle signs, and yeah, slowly we began to realize that this is, you know, more of an issue than we thought it would, than we thought it was.
And it's, you know, it's like, again, sort of like, you know, come back to you, Saurav, because, you know, you obviously have spent a lot of time, you know, with Daksha, with Sonia, Meera's sister, and you also, you know, with her father. And I know that sort of like her brother-in-law as well, because, you know, throughout the chapters, or all the chapters, you know, there are references to, you know, all of them begging Meera to not be with this person, to just sort of like walk away. And, you know, it's like, what is sort of like what we I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, what was sort of like, what do they feel was going through Meera's mindset for her not to have, you know, sort of like, I suppose, listened to her family? What was actually going on with him that was driving that wedge between her and her family? And also, I did watch a video that was made not long after she passed away, where her friends all spoke about her death and said that none of them saw it, and they just felt that she just wanted to move away from them because she had a boyfriend. And the level of guilt that they, you know, I mean, bless them, they weren't to know. And, you know, in your late teens, in your 20s, you don't always pick up the cues. So you know, it's easy for us to say you shouldn't feel, you know, don't feel guilty. But it's that whole, where was the mindset of the family, and what are the sort of things they tried to do to remove Meera from this situation?
Well, we also have to understand that Meera at this point was adult, a working adult.
Sorry,
with control.
going in
Sorry,
and
can you
out.
hear me a bit better now? Okay.
Yeah.
We have to understand also the background to your question. Meera at this time was an adult as well, so she was financially independent in that she worked. She could make her own decisions. Yet at the same time, from a family and friend perspective, you're seeing that her personality slowly change and regress, and all of these qualities that you associate with her wonderful personality are now being replaced with different emotions: doubt, judgment of oneself, fear, basically becoming really reticent and being suspicious in the way that she goes about her activity. So there's only so much you can do and assume. And even though the family knows her so well, at a certain point, Meera just shut down, because that's part of the brainwashing program, which the perpetrator instilled, which was essentially, we love each other. If your family and your friends are saying bad things about us, then whose interests are they really looking after? They're clearly not looking after yours. They don't want you to be happy. And after a certain amount of time, when this is constantly fed into one's head, you start to unfortunately believe certain elements. And in Sonia's case, for example, she questioned her sister on many occasions, because she could see this personality changing. And, you know, looking back in hindsight, you think that questioning someone, being a bit angry, a bit frustrated with them, wasn't the correct response. But when you're there dealing with your sister or your loved one or your daughter, it's only natural to think, well, why can't you put yourself together and realize that whatever this person is doing to you is obviously not in your best interest? But then we can only look back in hindsight and say that, but at the time, you've got someone who is blackmailing you, extorting you, constantly telling you that you are not a good person and that your family don't care for you. And when you get that fed into your brain repeatedly through your phone, through your email, through your phone call, the meeting that person, you unfortunately start to believe a lot of it as time went on. And then she disconnected herself from her friends, from her family as well, even turned on them to a certain extent. And then when she actually did break the relationship down, that's when the threats came in, threats to family, threats to friends. And then you see Meera basically taking on all of this on herself, on her own shoulders, seeing herself as some kind of warrior in a sense, thinking, I am the only one who can look after my family and my friends and my loved ones because they aren't in a position to do the same. And you have to really feel sorry for her because she felt that she was the only one who was capable of doing this. When, as a family member, you're thinking, no, you have plenty of opportunities. And I'm sure, as Nillo would describe, there were opportunities available to her. For example, to relocate to the States, to be taken on a few month-long trips to India, for example. And at the time that she took her life, she was actually on the verge of going to India for a few months. And yet she's still saying to Daksha, you know what, I'm still not safe anywhere I go in the world. And we can only say as a family member, what on earth are you talking about? Of course he can't get to you, he's not MI5 or something. And yet as a victim, you're thinking to yourself, it doesn't matter where I go, where you take me, this person has a hold over my family and can threaten me. And you know, you have to look at it from her perspective because Sonia and her family and her 2 young children were in London and the family are based in Leicester. So when this person is saying, look, doesn't matter what you do, I just need to pick up the phone and I can get to them. Imagine living with that every day, every hour. So, you know, it's very difficult to comprehend.
And the thing is, it's like, you know, sort of like aside from that, 'cause that's sort of like when it escalates, but aside from that, a perpetrator is very good at, even before the violence begins, is actually chipping away at their chosen victim's confidence. So it'll be little things like, oh, well, you know, nobody else can see your beauty, only I can see your beauty. You know, or doing sort of like so little things like, you know, it might begin with controlling food. Like, you know, you go out for dinner, how much food that the perpetrator allows their victim to order, or how much, you know, whether they're allowed to have, you know, I don't know if they go for pizza, whether they're allowed to have half a slice of pizza or a full slice. So it starts with little things, doesn't it? And it sort of like chips away at the victim's mental health, their confidence, their ability to trust themselves. So by the time the violence starts, they've already lost a huge amount of confidence within themselves. And then when it escalates, they've got to that point where they actually have no confidence whatsoever and feel that they are completely isolated and on their own. So the family members will say, look, we're here. But because they've been gaslighted and they've been groomed and they've had their absolute light, you know, sort of like blown out again and again and again. You know, by the time it gets to the situation where it did with Meera, there's nothing that the family could actually do. So, Nillo, I mean, you know, let's, you know, because I'm sort of like saying that we are doing a lot, and you know, and this, and today, I know today's show is going to be, you know, we are tackling a lot of deep, dark issues. But let's talk about Meera's personality, and you know, we said, because I think it'd be nice for people to understand who Meera was before this person took hold of her. But just tell us a little bit about her, you know, her personality, her kindness, her ability to see the good in people and want the best for people. Because you were narrating a really lovely story earlier. So why don't you tell us about that?
Okay, so she was down in London for the weekend, and one weekend I said, everyone else was busy, so I said, hey, Meera Bonds. I used to call her Meera Bonds because she was, you know, wacky. And I said, come on, let's go shopping. Let's go to Brent Cross for the day. Just me and you. I need to buy a dress for a special occasion, and I want your opinion on it. And I said, be brutal. You know, I don't want any airy-fairy. Be brutal. And she said, okay, I will. And so we spent the day. We were in and out of shops, and she had 3 signals. This was great. This was okay. You know, well, we could come back to that. and this was absolutely no way. Yeah, so those were the three signals. So we were running, we stopped for lunch, and then after lunch we carried on again. And most of the day, the signals were this, or they were that. Sorry, my screen. They were that, And I said to her at one point of the day, I said, Meera, I know I asked you to be brutal, but you don't need to be that brutal. So she said, no, we need to find the right dress. So at the end of this was coming to the end of the day now. We'd been to many, many shops, and we finally got to the last shop, and we were going through the rails, and she said, Nillo, mummy, try this dress on. So when I came out of the changing room, her eyes lit up, and not just one, but both her thumbs were up, and she was like, yay, cheering. She said, that is the one. That is the one you need to get. So, she wanted the best. She wanted the best for everyone. She wanted, she wanted the right, and then, I kind of realized that this comes from a place of love, that she loves me, and, she wants the best for me. And that's how she was, And then another time, I remember, quite often, she'd always start her stories when she had funny stories to tell me. She'd say, guess what, and I'd be like, yes. And then she'd start laughing even before she, got to the story. And what would normally take a couple of minutes to tell would sometimes take 10 minutes, because she'd be laughing so much in between her, story. And she was just a lot of fun. She was fun, she was confident. And I think because she was fun, she had a lot of friends. She was really popular. And I think it's a real testament to her that her friends have still kept in touch with her parents, and they often visited. Before the pandemic, now they can't visit so much, but they would regularly visit the family. And even now they call all the time, Meera's parents, to check that they're okay. And I think it's because of the type of person she was. She was so loved by her family, by her friends, and she was so popular because of, I think, her honesty, her friendliness, and really just the way she was. People loved her. We all loved her. Yeah.
And it's, I guess it's sort of, interesting is not really the right word to use, but it's. I think most people are sort of like going to say, well, if she was that strong a woman, that gracious, that intelligent, that bright, how did she get herself involved with somebody who was, a sociopath, an awful person? Whoever wants to take that. So, Nillo, do you want to?
Yeah. I think, what, out of all the girls in our family, I think Meera was the most confident. She was bubbly, she was confident, and that sometimes takes me aback, that how could this have happened? So I think if it can happen to Meera, it could happen to a large number of girls. Yeah, Saurav, if you want to.
Yeah, it reminds me of the account of a survivor who actually spoke to me about the butterfly one. So just quick segue into that story. So this lady was a C-suite executive who fell in love with this charming man who was extremely educated, and they got on really well. And it seemed like a perfect relationship. And they went on their honeymoon. And in their hotel room, getting ready for dinner, she was apparently taking too long. So he went into the bathroom, grabbed her by the hair, started kicking her. And this was someone she thought was in love with her, and there was no previous sign of violence at this point at all. So what the symmetry there between that and this, in the case of Meera, is when you get with someone and you look for their best quality and you fall in love with them, you don't immediately think, well, I found myself a horrible narcissist and abuser. You look for the best of them. You try to make things work. And that's what Meera tried to do with this guy. Basically, he was a childhood crush. She knew him from school, and they just met up many, many years down the road and got together again. And like all narcissists and abusers, they're extremely good actors. They're Academy Award-winning actors. They know how to manage their personality. They think about conversation and reactions 3 steps in advance. They're like chess players. And in this case, even though he may have initially liked Meera a great deal, maybe even loved Meera a great deal, once she showed herself to be a strong, confident person who wasn't afraid of talking back, who wasn't afraid of sticking up for herself, that triggered something within him that he disliked immensely. And from that point on, he had to control her. He had to control her reactions to him, her family, her friends. So it kind of turned on a switch. I mean, it would be easy to label all perpetrators as monsters from the beginning, but unfortunately they become like that. It's learned behavior. It's behavior reinforced by the way they see their world. And one thing they despise most of all is a woman or a man even who is in control of their faculties, who's confident, who won't take no for an answer, who knows that they deserve better. And unfortunately, once that button was pressed, a whole new personality came out. And it wasn't about loving Meera or looking after her. It was about ensuring that she couldn't get away from his grasp. And that's why he continued to feed all sorts of ridiculous things into her about how you should look, how you should react to people, where you should be. If it got to the point where it was ridiculous, where she'd go out with friends and he would want proof. He'd want to say, send me a picture of the receipt, prove to me where you were, send me a WhatsApp location point. And she would do this because she knew if she didn't, she knew exactly what the consequences would be. And at a certain point, you're thinking, look, let me just do this to play along, to keep him happy because I care about this relationship working out. But then after a certain point, it's fear that if I don't do this, if I don't check in, if I don't provide accurate information, he's going to do all sorts of horrible things to me.
Yeah. Now, because here's the thing, it's like, you were saying about sort of, from the butterfly effect and the CEO whose first experience of domestic abuse was in the hotel room. And, Meera's also sort of like started, sort of like all of a sudden, there was probably grooming there from the beginning, but all of a sudden it escalated. So what is it about, and this is not a judgmental thing, I'm just thinking, what is it about people, not just women, because there are so many men that are also being domestically abused, that are being driven to suicide because of their partners, or sort of same-sex couples as well. But what is it about the victim that keeps them in that relationship, even though that person shows them time and time again that they are not capable of change, and that actually this vicious, violent person you see in front of you is exactly who they are, and there is no hidden goodness in them? Why in your experience of having talked to so many domestic abuse victims, why do they still stay?
Well, I think it's because ultimately when you're in a relationship, you hope for the best, you look for the positive outcomes, you don't immediately shut things down, even though it seems like that would be a natural response. It's because if you're in a situation where you're with children, for example, or you're living in the home and you're not financially independent and he controls the finances, for example, then you look for positive outcomes. You try to, ensure that the relationship can get onto an equal footing. And also you believe that you can perhaps change this person. Of course, there's also the brainwashing element, which unfortunately takes root, which is you're felt to me that it is your fault and that you have some responsibility towards what's going on and that you have to fix it. That's not always correct, of course, we know that. But because you're trying to ensure that this relationship will work out for your children, for your family, for the marriage, you try to fix what can't be fixed, and you try to change those elements of your personality and bend your will to that person. The perpetrator often is the one with the problem, whether it's drink, whether it's a previous relationship gone bad, or their behavior. And unfortunately, we hear a lot about feeding the troll, or feeding the demon. And that's what happens in this case, because in Meera's case as well, the perpetrator looks for weakness. There's one brief example in the book where there's a friend who is very strong-minded and very confident, who stood up to him after he basically tried to threaten her, and her reaction was pretty much, well, go on, do that, see if I'm afraid. And immediately he backed down. But that's that person. Meera, as a person who is worried about what he's going to do to her sister, her mother, her father, can't afford to take that risk. So after a certain point, when it's not about trying to please the partner or look after your children. It's simply concerned with the threat. And if someone is saying, I just need to pick up the phone, I've got access to guns, I can call people around your house and do all sorts of awful things to your family member, you start to believe that. And, when you get to that point, Meera, unfortunately, was a person who always looked for the good in people. And I say unfortunately, because there are some men and some women who would immediately just say, I don't deserve to be treated like that. You can't get away with this. I'm going to go straight to the police. That's the end of the matter. Unfortunately, there are not many people about like that. And because they have been groomed, because they have been brainwashed, and they've had their confidence dragged down to such a limit, they aren't able to just say, look, they aren't able to just challenge a perpetrator. We have to be sympathetic to that process, because it is a process. Because the perpetrator knows exactly what they're doing every step of the way.
No, absolutely. Because in one of your things, and I'm sort of like quoting, it's like you said that, where is it? You said that basically, Meera was, he saw her as like, this nice, kind girl next door who could be manipulated and taken advantage of, and that's something that they do. But here's the thing, because Nillo, maybe you want to answer this. Is I know sort of like from the very first incident, the family were like, we need to get the police, and Meera, it took her. Well, it was like she was being forced to go to the police. Now, can you sort of like go through sort of like that process of like her sort of like saying okay, fine, and then pulling out and then saying yes, let's go to the police.
I think above anything was her worry that any harm would come to her family, because I think he would say, it just takes a phone call from me and I can arrange to do all sorts of things. So I think she really, really, really wanted to go. She wanted to report each time, but I think it was her fear for her family. I think it was just, she didn't want anything to happen to more than to herself. She didn't want any. Her sister had 2 young children, for her sister in London, for her parents. She was petrified that harm would come to them if she did ever go to the police or report anything. So I think that stopped her, which is a tremendous shame.
And that that actually is you can, I suppose in one way you're getting into her mindset and understanding of why she felt that taking her life was the only way out of this, to make sure that her family was safe. Now and one of the other things, you've said that sort of like for Meera, being in an abusive relationship was somewhat similar to being in a cult, and that one of the things that prevents people from leaving cults or even fundamentalist religious groups is the fear of loss. So the loss of her family, the loss of her security, loss of everything she knows. And sometimes we do get stuck in a very uncomfortable comfort zone, don't we? So can you just sort of like, can you just sort of like say, in the days leading up to her suicide, and then, then we want to sort of like go through sort of, we'll then sort of like move into what Dr. is going to get out of this, but leading up to her suicide, was there a noticeable change in her behaviour that the family picked up, or were they able to pick it up in hindsight?
Well, there were family members who had close contact with her, and it was obvious there was a change. One of the most concerning, I guess, was that she was detaching herself from a lot of what was going on. In that, she was deleting photos of her social media profiles, she was deleting all of her emails, and she was deleting a lot of numbers and basically saying to people, don't contact me, and shutting herself down from the world and from family. The last weekend of her life, actually, she was on a shopping trip, and you'd think you'd be comfortable there, but yet you've got someone who's constantly on the phone, who's deleting messages, deleting photos of loved ones, of family. And, in hindsight, you wonder, why on earth would you do such things? And also being really cryptic about movements and what's going to happen next. And, unfortunately, we know on the day of her passing, she left a job. She resigned from her job, a job that she was doing really well in. Her boss actually said after her passing, she had a bright future ahead of her. And yet nobody would know that she was going to do this. But it seemed like, unfortunately, when you talk about her suicide note, it's written in two distinct phases. One where the handwriting is very steady, and the other half, which is extremely rushed. So you know that this was a process in her mind that was being thought about. And unfortunately, with the perpetrator, he was feeding her awful imagery, links to articles, videos, which shouldn't even be on YouTube, quite frankly, but they are, about procedural things, which I don't want to get into because they're really upsetting. But again, if you're vulnerable and you're in this place, why on earth would you be sending someone this information if you don't secretly hope that they're going to do something with it? So that was particularly sad as well, but we only knew those things in hindsight. But in the weeks coming up to her passing, she was really disconnected. She was really negative about the world, negative about the threats to her family. And, you know, I would just sort of preface that because part of writing this book allowed me access to some police interviews, which she basically went to the police on her own account, on her own volition to make a complaint. And these are years before what happened. And it's so painful and awful to watch this footage because she is in such a state. And this is just years before what happened. And you can only think if this was years before she took her life, how on earth was she in the weeks and months leading up to her passing? So I guess what you could say is that she was just disconnecting herself from her family slowly and from her friends and being really self-contained within her world. And only she really knew what was happening and, you know, why you'd want to resign from your job the day in which you're passing makes it very clear that she had thought about what was going to happen and she was quite set on her mind. And as you were reading the book, even on the day of her passing in the morning, she's still talking to her perpetrator, even though the relationship is over. Because one thing that perpetrators like to do is to victimize themselves and to then turn the tables and say, look at me, look at what's happening to me. I don't want to live anymore because of what you are doing. Then as a good person, which Meera was, you don't automatically think, I'm just going to shut this person out. You think to yourself, well, I still want to help this horrible person because we have a history, because I don't want to be the cause of their unhappiness or for them to take their own life. But even till her last day, Meera is still thinking about other people and helping other people. And in her note, it's all about her family. It's all about if she removes herself from the world, she is removing the threat from them. And that just shows how selfless and loving she still was up until her family. So,
no, absolutely, because again, you know, it's like you've got things here because, you know, again, depression is like the big thing that we touched on at the beginning of this because, you know, relentless abuse like this can actually, you know, does lead to high levels of anxiety and depression and PTSD as well, and potentially could lead to, you know, other sort of like mental health trauma related responses. And you know, in there you said that, you know, that she was confused, blaming herself for her thoughts and actions, and wondering what she had done to deserve such appalling treatment. It's like that mindset, isn't it? So going back to the police interviews and that, because, you know, and obviously there were witnesses, there was evidence, there was, you know, absolute incontrovertible evidence of the domestic abuse and the physical domestic abuse that she was actually being subjected to. Why? I mean, because I know there's a few times that she withdrew her complaints, but what level of support did she get from the police, from social services, from the sort of like the wider mental health practitioner community?
well, in terms of that, so the police initially, they sort of paid lip service to what's happening. And one of the most concerning aspects is if someone is constantly retracting their account and failing to provide evidence, that these are clear signs of something deeper and merits investigation. And that side of the investigation is completely lacking. Just understanding the nuances of what domestic abuse involves, particularly when you have someone who's constantly backtracking their statements, doesn't want to give the name, is one moment completely set on bringing forward charges, and then the next day it retracts from that. I mean, what was really happening was that he was still threatening her and saying, don't you dare contact the police because I have a relative who's a police officer, and the minute you do something, it's going to flag up on his screen and I'm going to know about it. The police weren't looking into deeper aspects of the violence and understanding why the victim keeps changing their statement and keeps retracting their statements and doesn't want to push forward. So that side of the investigation is completely lacking, and to this day needs to be more focused, particularly in South Asian communities as well, where sometimes survivors don't want to bring all of this information out in the open because they don't want their families to become involved because they're worried about it.
Yeah.
So there's that side of things. And on the mental health side, yes, Meera did reach out to a few organizations, but unfortunately, we don't know the specific details of what those conversations were because she's taken that with her, unfortunately. But again, it's the case that whenever she did try to make a complaint with the police, they really didn't take the threat seriously. And there was one particular case where Meera was extremely worried about what was going to happen to her sister and their family in London. And she received no assurances from the police, no sort of visible proactive action. They were going to go down to London, liaise with their forces there, ensure that they were safe. Because the perpetrator was sending pictures of the sister's house and saying, this is where I'm outside right now, what are you going to do about it, basically? And yet we know that he may not even have actually physically been there because of Google Maps, because of Google Streets and technology. But yet when the person is saying, I have a gun, I have weaponry, and Meera is then raising this point with the police, why do they not then think to themselves, we need to escalate this, we need to talk, at least talk to this person as a person of interest. So on that part of the side of things, they're completely failing. And that's one aspect of domestic abuse which they're not appreciating enough, which is, yes, you have the survivor and the victim who's going through the abuse, but if they are then talking about threats to the family, you need to action that, you need to act on that. And then in some cases where they actually did speak to the perpetrator and then said, you need to modulate your behavior, you cannot contact Meera ever again through your mobile phone. And yet, when he then switched to emails, that wasn't factored into the conversation. So apparently, you can't contact the victim through mobile phones. What if you then change your number? What if you then call from a withheld number? What if then you're emailing that person? The case and the investigation didn't cater for that because the perpetrator is smart. If you as a police officer tell them, don't you ever call her from your number again, you're going to find different ways to contact her. It's obvious, it's common sense. But if that's something that the police is not thinking about.
And this is it. I mean, again, it's like, saying about sort of like the fact that the police didn't say there were failings throughout, in terms of sort of like this. And, like you say, it is actually very shocking that there is a message in black and white that is stating that I have a gun and I'm going to kill your family, and yet the police aren't doing anything. And I know they have a lot to contend with, because as many domestic abuse victims, real domestic abuse victims that there are as many who are not necessarily domestic abuse victims but might be crying wolf. And the other side of it is, and this is something that sort of like please feel free to interject here as well, but the other side of it is that, I read a few comments on some of the posts where there are women who are saying, well, why didn't the woman keep herself safe? Why didn't the woman stop this? And, we've got such a sort of indoctrinated patriarchal mindset, especially in the Southeast Asian community. We've got it in the West anyway, where, well, as a woman, don't walk alone at night, don't wear revealing clothes, don't do this. So it's always victim blaming. But in the Southeast community, it seems to be even more emphasized in terms of it's the victim's fault. Like when they burn the new bride, well, it's her fault because she didn't have enough dowry. Or if the husband abuses the wife and then has an affair, well, what did the wife do wrong? And it's that sort of like mentality. Now, what can be done? What is actually being done? Because I know you're with, you're doing a lot of work at the moment, or with a number of other human rights activists. What can be done with the community? And actually, Nillo, as a member of the family of a loved one that actually did suffer from domestic abuse and did take their life, what is it that you can do to actually ensure that no other family member loses their daughter like this?
I think there is a lack of understanding and compassion for domestic violence victims, especially from our community and our culture. People don't understand the complexity of these situations often, and I think people are quick to judge. They say, why didn't she just leave? It's not an easy thing, but I think these are often taboo subjects as well. They're not openly discussed in our community, and I think they need to be discussed, and I think there needs to be more understanding and more help, and for people to reach out more, so that you can help others that are in a similar situation. So I think there needs to be more discussion. There needs to be more openness, and I think Daksha's been incredibly brave to tell this story, so she can help others who are going through a similar situation.
And I mean, there are a few sort of like excerpts from the book that that we want to sort of like go through. So do you want to sort of like because I know you guys you picked out a few paragraphs. Can you just read a couple of excerpts that sort of like
Yeah, sure. I picked out a couple that resonate with me as well as a mother. So I've taken them from Daksha's perspective. Okay, I'll do page 66. Okay. So it is a horrible feeling to know that you cannot create safety for your child, that there is someone out there determined to wreck your child's life, and that you feel helpless to do anything about it. Something inside Meera had broken and could not be repaired. It could not be seen, it could not be heard, it just lived inside her and was dying every day. I swore to look after her and to make everything proper for her. But there are some things that hide deep inside of people that remain untouched, cannot be seen and cannot be interfered with. I don't know how I would change those last few months to avoid the horrible outcome that lay ahead of us, but I know that even when she was as far away as possible from him, he was still able to destroy my child's will and reason to live. So that's one of them.
And that's that's something Saurav had been saying, was that it's that feeling of helplessness, because she's actually, because I mean the prayer that she's actually written at the beginning of the book is actually quite beautiful. So maybe we'll end the show with that prayer, because actually it's beautiful words. So I mean, like, in terms of sort of like, what do you think, and we'll go back to another paragraph in a minute, So what and actually both of you can answer this. What are the signs that people need to look out for if they've got a family member that they suspect is being domestically abused or abused in any way? What are the signs that we as family members should be looking out for?
I think the most immediate thing is changing personality. It's very obvious when if someone just has a breakup, for example, they might be a bit sad, but they want to be with their family. But if they have really changed their behavior to the point that it's obvious it's for someone else, and they're alienating family and friends, that's something to look out for. If they're very suspicious about their behavior, if they don't like to talk about themselves and what's going on in their life. And one thing Sonia mentioned in an interview the other day was that there was a point where Meera just wanted to know about the family and what was going on in Sonia's life and everyone else's life, but she refused to talk about what was happening with her. And she was really, she just basically tried to obscure it as much as possible. I think that's one of the most immediate signs. When you see a change of personality, you see a withdrawal of information, that's the first sign. And then, of course, when their behavior becomes suspicious, you need to think about why they're changing that behavior, why are they making these strange choices which are completely out of character for them. And then you just need to think perhaps that you maybe need to keep more of a watch on their behavior and what they're doing and why they might be doing it. And you as a parent, you know your child like anyone else, and you know their behavior. So it's very obvious when you're changing it to suit someone else's pattern or requirements. So I think that's just someone to look out for And then there's the obvious ones, just when you see that, I mean, we always think an injury is the most obvious thing to look out for, but it always starts mentally. So it's going to be the behavior, it's going to be the way they treat people, spend time they spend on their phone, the way they talk about their own lives and themselves. That's the first thing you need to look out for. Nillo, what would you think?
No, I agree with everything you say. Yeah, when they start, withdrawing, when they don't message you as often, when they, I know she was incredibly close to Sonia all throughout their lives. They were, they were always together. They always discussed everything. There were no secrets. But when they start removing themselves from you, slowly removing them, question it. If there's ever one of your family members or a friend, don't be afraid to question them. Don't be afraid to ask. Yeah. I think you need to be brave and sort of question things. Family members, friends. You need to help. You need to reach out, because the victim doesn't always necessarily ask for the help. So I think it's for the rest of society or friends or family to reach out and try and help.
And I also think that you may need to be cruel to be kind, because there was one particular occasion in the book where Meera was obviously beaten and the physical scars were on her. So she was removed from the family home to somewhere else. But unfortunately, she still had access to her phone. And one family member told me that he wished he had taken it from her that entire weekend. But it was obvious that the perpetrator was still trying to contact her. But like I said, when you remove someone from that situation, the mobile phone, social media, these can become weapons. So sometimes you do need to monitor them, and you do need to be cruel to be kind. And if you do take away that phone and they hate you for it, sometimes you just may have to take it on the chin and do that.
And I think you've really hit the nail on the head with that, because actually sometimes it's about removing your own ego to make sure that the soul of the person that is actually being broken, is looked after. Because I know that there have been situations where, again, sort of like going from sort of like experiences of people I know, etc., but where somebody was being horrifically domestically abused, psychologically abused, mentally abused, and this person had tried to take their own life a number of times unsuccessfully. But the friends, instead of seeing this person who was a very bubbly, bright, vivacious person as, there's something going on, we need to find out what. It was like, oh, you've changed. You're just bitter and twisted now. We don't want to know. Really quite horrible, harmful things, which then made that person then want to go home and again, make another attempt. And it is about removing your ego to see the other person. It's not always about you. And if somebody isn't, if somebody does isolate, somebody does become a hermit, I guess we have to understand that's not a reflection on us. That's a reflection on what's going on with them mentally. And if that's going on with them mentally, then we need to be there and say, right, you know what, we're here. We're not moving. We're here. You need to, if you want to talk to me, you can talk to me. If you don't want to talk to me, that's not a problem, but I'm here.
Yeah.
And it's doing that. And what you're saying to me, I think hindsight is a wonderful thing. And this family member saying they wish they'd taken the phone, it's, we don't, like you said, at that point, we can't always think what is the right thing to do, because all we want to do is put our arms around this person that's hurting.
Yeah.
And I think, sorry, one very quick thing. What's really sad about this particular story is the ending, because most cases where a person who's experienced domestic abuse passes away is at the hands of the perpetrator. Very rarely, far more often than we'd like to think, is by their own hand. And constantly reading this book, speaking to family members, it's awful, because you know what's going to happen. And you constantly think about things you can do to have helped her and avoid it from happening. But yet it still does. So we would hope that when you do read this book, you understand that the mind is a very precarious thing, a very sensitive thing. And we have to always be mindful of what people are experiencing and going through on a daily basis, because we really don't know how dangerous something maybe is happening to them, and it may take them over the edge.
No, absolutely. And I mean, the other thing that sort of like, was quite sort of like apparent throughout the book was the fact that actually not only that horrible threat at the beginning, but the perpetrator's mother and sisters actually also were complicit in the abuse, because they didn't do anything to stop. They knew that this was going on, but they did nothing to stop it. They didn't think about, the consequences to someone else's daughter. So it also begins within our own families, doesn't it? That if you know that somebody in your family is capable of any level of abuse, whether it's physical, mental, psychological, surely as family members, we, owe it to the world or community to make sure that whoever is in our family that is an abuser, that we're not allowing them, we're not being complicit in their abuse. So what sort of advice would you actually give, to sort of like the mothers and sisters of perpetrators like this person?
Is that me?
Yeah, go on.
I'd like. I think we need to teach our daughters and sons, to respect women. We also need to speak to our daughters too. I think we need to teach our children the signs to look out for if you're in a relationship. If anything happens that you don't feel is right, signs to look out for. I think there needs to be, and if you do notice anything wrong happening within your family, speak out. Don't be afraid to speak out, because by speaking out, that's the only way that we're going to be able to resolve issues or to help. Saurav?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that in this case, the perpetrator was a very damaged individual, and his family knew that too. So in the situation in the book which you read about, where Meera moved in to their family home for a period of time, even his family knew how dangerous he was to himself and to others. So my advice would just be, we're all human beings, if you know that someone needs help, which was him, and is a risk to others, you need to think about the other person in the relationship, Meera, and advise her to step away from it for her own good, and to realize that to fix someone's own problems must be done with their own initiative, and that a relationship is the worst thing they need to be dealing with at that time. They need to concentrate on themselves, and they didn't do that in this case. And after a while, they saw Meera as the catalyst for this man's own depravity and his own problems. So we need to think about other people in relationships, what they're going through, particularly women, and to think that we need to think about their welfare as well, not just my son and my daughter. And you have to understand that the mind, like I said, is a very sensitive thing. And sometimes the best thing for two people is for them to be apart. And that's what should have happened here.
No, absolutely. And I think, like you said, and you both hit the nail on the head, it's having that empathy and compassion, so that this may not be my daughter or my son that is the victim, but actually that's somebody's daughter, that's somebody's son, and that could so easily be mine. Right, I'm very conscious that we have gone over the hour, and I know sort of like, sorry, you've got some of them, you've got some other sort of interviews and meetings to get to. I mean, Nillo, have you got any sort of like because I know we've got like a few more sort of excerpts to read. Do you want to read a few of them before the show?
Yeah, sure. Okay, I'll do. When she discovered 122. Okay. This was after she discovered that her daughter Meera had died. When I was taken to her room, I could see she was lying on the bed, just like she was asleep, almost like nothing had happened. When you hear about sudden deaths like this, you almost expect to look for signs of violence, whether it's a bomb, plane crashes, typhoons, natural disasters. But there, in that small bedroom in a quiet street in Leicester, a young girl lay there perfectly still, giving no clue as to the violence and turmoil that brought her to do what she did. I could weep, I could sob, I could shake her, but she wasn't going to get up. It wasn't a dream or even a nightmare. This was now our reality, and nothing could change it.
In that, it just doesn't bear thinking about. And
It's the saddest
you know,
thing.
it's just awful. I mean, it was sad to read. It's sad to hear. I mean, so can we? I mean, because I know it's such a sad, tragic, reality. What is it that Daksha actually wants to gain from this, from sharing Meera's story, from actually, publishing this book? What is it that she wants to gain?
Sure. What Daksha wants to gain is to instill a sense of perseverance and courage in others who are going through the same thing. So to be able to say, you need to look for help and find help and contact charities and mental wellness charities to deal with what's going on in your life, whether it's depression, whether it's a violent relationship, or the aftermath. And to be able to basically say that you can get help, you can find help, and your loved ones, and there are people out there who want to help and are able to help. The Facebook group that she has, for example, has many people on it who have experienced abuse and find it a good point of reference to talk to others, to contact charities. She would just hope that what happened to Meera doesn't happen to anyone else, and to understand and appreciate that no matter how young you are, what background you are from, or what profession you are in, you are not invulnerable to what can happen to you. And I think there's an appreciation there on that side, from the survivor side, but also for the elders, for the family members, to understand more about this condition, to understand more about depression, mental wellness, and how risky these events are and what they can happen, whether it's to your son, your daughter, your sister, or your brother. So I think what Daksha really wants is that people understand and educate themselves about the subject, particularly in our communities, and that they understand that there are organizations out there to signpost people, to contact those organizations, to not be afraid to take the first step, and to continue with the process. It's almost like a prescription, because some people think, I'll contact them once, I'll get a few bits of advice, then I'll return to life. But unfortunately, the same thing happens again and again. You have to stay the course. You have to contact these organizations, speak with them on a consistent basis. And it's already happening now. So during lockdown, the number of inquiries made to chatbots and chat systems on the websites spiked by 60%. According to Refuge, when the last lockdown finished, there was a huge uptick in the number of claims for emergency accommodation, and it's going to happen again now. So it's to understand what these people are going through within their own homes, in relationships, and to embolden them to get in touch with these organizations and to pick up the phone. If you go to the back of the book, there are a number of organizations in Leicester that we have signposted that we think are really good organizations that we can get hold of. But of course, there's the Samaritans, there are good suicide awareness organizations all over the world. I think what Daksha would just hope is that you don't have to be a victim, you can get help, and there are people that want to help.
Yeah. No, and thank you for that. And Saurav, can you just sort of and I'm going to end with you, Nillo, in a minute, but Saurav, can you just sort of just remind people the name of the book, and also, where they can actually purchase it?
Sure. So the name of the book is called Fall in Light, A Mother's Story. The title Fall in Light was picked because even though Meera took her own life and passed away in awful circumstances, her fall was to a better place, a place of light, a place of hope. Her life can be a beacon to others to guide them towards the right path. So the book is available everywhere where you can buy good books, particularly on Amazon. Feedback has been tremendous, including from survivors of domestic abuse. So the first place you can get the book is Amazon, of course. We've been able to speak about the book on many different forums. And we have to remember, of course, for those who aren't familiar with this case, when it happened, it received international headlines. Meera's passing in Leicester was picked up by the Times of India, American outlets. This is a story that resonates across the world. So the book is called Fall in Light, A Mother's Story. Amazon is probably the best place to find it, wherever you live. And importantly, part proceeds of this book go to charities who help individuals suffering from domestic abuse, who have suicidal thoughts, and have mental wellness challenges. So it's all for a good cause as well.
No, thank you, and and to say sort of like, thank you to everybody that's actually been making comments. My apologies that I haven't actually stopped to say hello to everybody that's joined us. It's just I think this topic is so important that I didn't really want to sort of like break the flow. So forgive me if I've not mentioned your name on today's show, but thank you all so much for joining. We've got this one I do want to read out though. Nina Bias has said, Meera's mum is amazing, raising awareness even while grieving. She is a true warrior. And I say, Dutcha, thank you so much for sharing your plight, sharing your story and your sadness, in the hope that actually no other mother has to go through what you've gone through. And Nillo, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing the stories of Meera and helping the world see what an absolute beautiful soul she was. Would you be happy to read a prayer for Meera from the beginning of the book to end the show? And then before you do that, just say to everybody, thank you again for joining us. Please, if you've watched this and it resonates with you, then please, like, share further afield, because, something that advice that Saurav has given or Nillo has given could potentially help, something that that may be going through this domestic abuse, or help others to pick up the cues. So, please share this. Let's spread the awareness, and, please go to Amazon and buy the book. And we can share the link, can't we, on the comments, or so people can find that. So next week, I'll say next week we've got, I'll talk about sort of like it during the week and social media, because I don't want to dilute anything that we're doing on today's show, because it's too important to talk about anything else. But we'll just say we will be back next week at 12 o'clock. And if I could just get you to read that, the prayer, and then we'll say goodbye.
A prayer for Meera. This is a mother's gift of love to her daughter. You left too early. Here is a small token. I hand it to you and for others about you. I give all my love to you, Meera, my golden child. Om Sai.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you, Nillo and Saurav, for sharing, sharing from the heart.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My family did. I am not the voices in my head. I am not the pieces of the brokenness inside. I am light. I'm not the mistakes that I have made, or any of the things that cause me pain. I am not the pieces of the dream I left behind. I am light. I am light. I am light. I am light. I am not the color of my eyes. I am not the skin on the outside. I am not my age. I am not my race. My soul inside is all light. I am light. I am light. I am divine. identity defined. I am a god on the inside. I am a star, a piece of it all. I am light, I am light.